No, Mr. John Nicholson.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker, sir, and it's a great pleasure to move this motion and to welcome so many members of the House to their places. Mr. Deputy Speaker, when I was born in the 1960s, two men who, hard to believe, I know.
80s, 50s.
That's on the record.
And you notice I didn't say which end of the 19th. Two men who were in love could be sent to prison for what they chose to do in the privacy of their own homes. It's hard now to fathom the mindset of those who defended such gross intrusion into the lives and rights of others. And yet, when one reads the speeches in this place at the time of the 1967 Decriminalisation Act, many members here presumed to tell their fellow citizens who they could and who they could not love, often couching their speeches in the most prurient and sometimes lascivious terms. And so it went on. Even after decriminalisation, numerous homophobic laws remained on the statute book, laws which only existed to enshrine inequality, ensuring that gay men could never enjoy the full fruits of equal citizenship. When I was a student at Glasgow University, the Student Union banned the University Gay Society from holding its meetings and dances on its premises, and the gay students could do absolutely nothing about that because there was no equality protection under the law. When I left university and applied for a job in the civil service and the diplomatic service, I had to sign an affidavit confirming that I was not gay. I wouldn't do that, and therefore I couldn't qualify for the post. In the 1980s, the tabloids screamed abuse about gay men and AIDS. It was routine to conflate homosexuality with paedophilia. Small wonder, then, that it was hard to come out as gay. I confess that I found it tough. I came from a modest Presbyterian background. I went to church every Sunday. I went to Sunday school. I went to the Crusaders. I prayed not to be gay. At school, gay was the worst taunt possible. There were, if you remember, gay ways of throwing a ball. And then there were straight ways of throwing a ball. And you had to be very sure which was which. And my honourable friend from Glasgow South laughs in clear recognition. Now, we had few, if any, role models. Larry Grayson and John Inman were staples of the television on a Saturday night. They were TV stars, and they fitted that gay stereotype. Comic characters, single, and as we know from their biographies, in denial about who they were. The future as a young gay boy didn't look promising. Who'd want to be gay in a country where you had to hide who you were? Lie if you wanted certain jobs. In fact, lie if you wanted to keep your job. It was, after all, as I've said, legal to sack someone simply because you discovered that they were gay. You could refuse to rent a house to a gay person. You could arrest a gay couple if they shared a hotel room because the law did not recognise hotel rooms as private spaces. And perhaps, and here we come to the crux of today's debate, most horrifyingly of all, you could arrest a 21-year-old man for sleeping with his 20-year-old boyfriend, and the 21-year-old could be tried, convicted and sentenced for underage sex. Now, as a young journalist, I made a film about how the law discriminated against gay men. In fact, I confess it was I who took Edwina Curry to Amsterdam at a time when she wasn't especially interested in the subject, and I wanted to confront her with the full horrors of gay law reform and equality. And she came back a changed character. It was perhaps a couple of the clubs I took her to. But she came back determined to reform the law because she'd seen the way that gay law reform could work in practice. Now, in that film, I interviewed military personnel with exemplary records who'd been followed home by the military police, determined to investigate a tip-off that the personnel concerned, that the soldier, the Air Forceman, the naval officer concerned was living privately with a same-sex partner. Now, interviewed, they could be disciplined if they lied. And of course, they could be sacked, and were sacked, if they told the truth, damned whatever choice they made. It wasn't until the 1990s that the European Court, yes, the great Satan itself, overturned this ban in the teeth of military opposition.
Hear, hear.
Military men hit the airwaves to predict the collapse of the British Navy, where such behaviour had previously never been known. Nelson, it seemed, Mr. Deputy Speaker, had never been kissed. Now, across the pond, Colin Powell was shamefully arguing the same tosh, though in his case, claiming that straight soldiers would never share a shower with gay soldiers if they knew their true nature. Much better to hide and share the shower, if you follow Mr. Powell's logic. I don't. Now, in my documentary, I interviewed gay men who'd been entrapped by so-called pretty policemen. And I interviewed Chief Constable Anderton of Greater Manchester, beloved by the tabloids as God's copper, with a bushy black beard of biblical proportions. He sat at his desk and defended the practice of sending out attractive young male police officers who would give gay men the eye, and if the gay man responded, he'd be arrested and his life ruined. In fact, since I announced this bill, I have had letters from people who have told me of their exact experience of being entrapped by police officers and how it ruined their life. This entrapment was a police priority in one of the country's biggest cities in the 1990s. It's hard to fathom because it was a disgrace. Gay men weren't free at home or at work. They weren't protected by law. They were under sustained attack by the law. Now, I felt myself to be lucky. I had supportive friends, a loving family, and a good job. I came out and have never regretted for a moment doing so. And goodness knows, I'm now a member of the gayest party in the... Just look at them. The gayest... Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think a heterosexual has just come out of the closet.
Career ruined. This party.
And our very gayness has, as you know, made Westminster the gayest parliament in the world.
Yeah.
I'm just looking over there at the gentleman in the wig and wondering how he's reacting. He's left, in fact. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will never forget the men in the documentary I presented for the BBC and the ruined lives scarred by a bitter sense of injustice. So, when I was chosen top of this ballot, I saw in it a golden opportunity. Society had moved on. We are now horrified by the inequalities of the past. We cringe when we read the homophobic rantings of some of our predecessors in this place.
Hear, hear.
We believe that gay service personnel should serve. We believe that being gay should be no bar to a career in the diplomatic service or any other service. We believe that gay couples should be able to share a bed in a hotel, that gay kids should not be harassed and bullied at school, that chief constables should not send out officers to flirt with and entrap citizens, and we believe that the age of consent should be equal. And looking across the House, I know that there is consensus about that in this place, just as there is in society. We don't want any of these prejudices for our future. But what about those living with unfair convictions from our past? How do we address their grievances? How do we address the injustices that they suffered? What about men, for instance, who are 21 and had a boyfriend of 20? I've detailed some of those cases that I covered for my documentary. All of us, I'm sure, as diligent MPs, have had mail from people who found themselves in those circumstances. What about those men of 21 who found themselves arrested, tried and convicted for having underage sex as a result? Underage sex. Just think about what that means to have that on your record with a man who is perhaps only a few months younger than you are. A consensual relationship with a contemporary old enough to serve in the military, old enough to drive a car, old enough legally to have a child of 4, but regarded by the homophobic laws of the time as a 20-year-old child unable to give consent. That 21-year-old with a criminal conviction has had to endure, perhaps for decades, an unfair conviction for underage sex. It may have blighted his life. Now, Stonewall, the extraordinary gay rights organisation which has led the national debate on gay law reform, had a solution. The Turing Bill, called after the eponymous wartime code-breaking hero Alan Turing. Now, Mr. Turing may have been hailed by Churchill, but that did not prevent him from being charged as a homosexual and being chemically castrated.
Shameful.
He committed suicide as a result. Now, in his honour, Stonewall wants all gay men living with convictions for crimes which are no longer on the statute book to be pardoned. And I couldn't think of a more noble bill to pilot through Parliament. With old friends on all sides of the House, I felt that the bill would attract all party support, and indeed it did, and I thank those who supported it. So when I was approached by the Tory whips and asked if I'd take on this bill, I was delighted to do so. The Conservative whips asked me for a meeting and promised me that if I took up the Turing Bill, there would be, and I quote them exactly, no tricks and no games from our side. I felt as if I was in an episode of House of Cards. Now, the Right Honourable Member for Surrey Heath, a principled long-term campaigner for law reform, was the Justice Secretary at the time, and he promised me the full support of the Justice Department. And I've worked closely with Stonewall on this bill, so let me tell you what this bill does and what this bill does not do. It does provide a blanket pardon for any gay man convicted of a crime which is no longer a crime. Now, the meaning of that is patently obvious. If the crime for which you were convicted is still a crime, by definition, you are not pardoned. So let nobody be confused about that. The aim of this simple measure is, I hope, obvious. The pardon confers no immediate advantage except this. It will, I hope, bring closure to those men who've had to thole monstrous, unfair criminal convictions for decades. They may have had to hide those convictions from family or friends. The conviction may have prevented them from applying for a job, but with my Turing Bill pardon before the House here today, they get belated justice and the knowledge that society has acknowledged that a great wrong was committed against them. The vast majority of gay men with convictions, I believe, will be satisfied with this anonymous private triumph. But there may also be some who want something more. Some who will feel that they shouldn't be offered a pardon for something which was never wrong in the first place. And for those men, I offer an additional option should they choose it. They will be able to have their name expunged from the records. However, and this is important, and many members have raised this with me, the records are often imprecise. Often there were catch-all arrests where the police would not specify the detail. So where the records are imprecise, where it is unclear whether the underage party was 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, or crucially, 15 or younger, the onus will be on the applicant to prove the age of his partner at the time of the arrest. Now, as a result of this, some men may not be able to have their records expunged because they're unable to provide the necessary proof, even though the then partner was over today's age of consent. And that will be deeply frustrating for them, I recognise that. However, this provision absolutely satisfies the concerns raised that we must be rigorous in ensuring that only those who have convictions for crimes not now in the statute book benefit from these measures. And all the legal advice that I've taken leaves me satisfied that this bill absolutely addresses that concern and is as watertight as it's possible to be under the circumstances. Now, Stonewall believes that only small numbers of men will avail themselves of this provision, the second provision of my bill. Many of the men affected are old, and these matters are far in their past and perhaps a secret. The requirements I'm imposing would be time-consuming and perhaps distressing for them to satisfy. They will, I believe, Stonewall believes, be satisfied with my automatic pardon. They will not seek to have the details expunged manually from their record. Now, if you'll forgive me, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to get back to that no tricks and no games promise, because I think it's important, because we may not be planning to stay in this House for very long, but other members present are passionate about Westminster and want Westminster to succeed. So nothing that we should do in procedural terms surely should bring this House into disrepute when we know certain words like filibuster shock and horrify ordinary members of the public who think it's appalling. I was hoping for an intervention and at last one came. Thank you.
Well, I thank the Honourable Member for allowing me to intervene so early in the debate and congratulate him on doing all that he's doing to raise the profile of this very important issue in public. The real question today, that we need to answer, is how can we deliver justice in the quickest, fairest way to those who have suffered the humiliation of conviction under archaic laws. Yesterday, the government announced that we would answer this question with a legislative vehicle that will provide a pardon for those people within a few months. This delivers on a manifesto commitment, but it also has cross-party support. It will be an amendment brought forward by a Liberal Democrat peer, and the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, yesterday called the move a great victory for all those who campaigned for this wrong. So what it will do is, as well as honouring the dead, the Honourable... If you'd hear me out, please. As well as honouring the dead, the Honourable Member seeks a pardon for the living. We have developed a way to do this without giving any perception that the pardon covers perpetrators of sex with a minor or non-consensual sex. What I would like to do today is to make a full and open offer to the Honourable Member to work with officials in the Ministry of Justice and the Home Office and Stonewall to give real effect to this pardon for the dead and the living as fairly and quickly as possible. So I ask him to withdraw this bill and support the amendment that has cross-party support in this House and the other place to resolve an injustice that for too long has been left unchallenged.
Well, I'd like to thank the Minister, and of course I accepted your offer back in June. So you've had plenty, your government's offer back in June, so we've had plenty of time to chat about this. And I have to say that standing up and proposing an offer of cooperation on the morning of my debate might be regarded as leaving it somewhat late for us to have a further private chat. But it's crucial for you to... The Honourable Member shakes his head saying, not my offer, and he didn't obviously know anything about it. But I can assure you that I have been talking with members of the government on and off since June. So yesterday the government, as you know, and as you've just said, accepted an amendment to the policing bill in the Lords and claimed that it was the Turing Bill. It isn't, even though some rather obliging news outlets have trumpeted their claim after reading the press releases. Now, I'll leave it to members of the House to decide whether it's fair to try and attempt to hijack my bill some 36 hours before its second reading in this place. Now, the private member bill process is, after all, intended to allow those of us not in government to seek to leave a legacy of legislation which we believe is good, kind and worthwhile. And I believe that this bill is kind. Now, the amendment accepted by the government would grant an automatic pardon to the deceased, if I understand it correctly. And yet the minister says he's very concerned that the bill's provisions would be misused because some people who behaved improperly would get under the radar and would get pardons that they're not entitled to. Well, if he thinks it's hard to enforce that with the living, imagine, by his own logic, how much harder it is to enforce that with the dead. So there's an intellectual incoherence. You can shake your head, but there is an intellectual incoherence at the heart of what you're proposing. And I fear that you haven't really thought it through. And I know that because I've been told in the course of this bill that I would get government support, then I wouldn't get government support. Then I would get government support, then I might get government support. I'm afraid the Conservative government has been all over the place in this, and I was very keen.
Nothing new now.
I was very keen for this not to be a party political issue. And at no point have I gone into the press or given interviews in which I referred to this as an SNP measure. I did not. And in fact, as you know, it's an English measure. So for those who criticise the SNP and say it's overly concerned with the Constitution and Scottish issues, here's something that tackles an English injustice. And I was keen to do so, and I was keen to do so on a cross-party... I won't thank you. I was keen to do so on a cross-party basis. And the fact I think that there were so many signatories from the Conservative Party and the Labour Party when I brought forward my bill rather proves this. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member, and can I commend him in the tone that he's brought to the speech today? But you said English only. As a Welsh MP, it's England and Wales. So can I remind you of that country, tagged on, in your opinion, to England? And can I perhaps tease out of you what the status is in Scotland with the Scottish Government?
My humble apologies for saying England only, and no one finds this more annoying than Scots, so I beg the honourable gentleman's pardon for that. You will know, of course, that the Scottish Government has been a long-term champion of gay rights, and the country has become famous for its progress on this issue. In fact, I remember there was a time when we were told by opponents of devolution that we should not have a Scottish Parliament because we relied on Westminster to keep us liberal. That was an old argument from the 1970s, I remember. We needed English and Welsh MPs to keep us on the right side of liberal law reform. Otherwise, we would be a religious puppet state, a sort of Presbyterian Iran. I like to think that the progress that we have made since Holyrood came into being has rather shown that we've got a good record on that. But to address your point, I have had discussions with Scottish ministers. There is, of course, widespread welcome for this legislation, and it is my belief that Holyrood would enact something very similar in due course. No, I won't, thank you. Now, let's focus exactly on what it is that the amendment that the Minister has mentioned does. The amendment accepted by the Government would grant an automatic pardon to the deceased. And of course that's great. But my bill provides the same provision. But I have to ask the House, should we not prioritise the living over the dead? Now, I don't know if you spotted an elderly gentleman who toured the TV and radio studios yesterday, a 93-year-old, who feels immensely strongly. No, none of the members on the Labour benches. No, somebody different who toured the TV studios yesterday, talking about the injustice that he feels about his criminal convictions. He hashtags himself the oldest gay in the village on Twitter. He's 93 and he says he's determined to live to 100 to see justice served because he has lived with a sense of injustice all these years. I'm going to make progress. How odd would it look for the elderly to be told that they must wait until they die for the automatic pardon which the government now seems to be proposing.
Yeah.
Let us finish, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the law reform that we have started by recognising that the victims of society's prejudices are still hurting and they're still alive.
Yeah.
They deserve the peace that this bill would bring. I beg to move.
Right. The question is that the bill now be read a second time. Craig.